Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the hushed chambers of Aztec midwifery, where the soft glow of copal incense dances across polished stone, and the air hums with whispered prayers to maternal deities. You trudge barefoot across cool temple floors, past rows of seed-filled urns and the sharp tang of maguey, until you reach a circular chamber lined with earthen benches. Here in this sacred space, you're about to witness a ritual older than any of your calendars could capture how Aztec midwives, known as Temalacatl, chose their fabled birthing stones. You probably won't survive the sheer precision of it without slipping into reverent awe. But that's half the point, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the circle, feeling the stones beneath your feet pulse with history. Aztec midwives weren't just birth attendants. They were guardians of life's threshold, trained by temple priests and female elders in the Temalacatl houses. Mainstream accounts note that Aztec women typically gave birth at home, surrounded by female kin, but when complications arose, or for special rituals, these midwives presided over stone-lined chambers in temple precincts. Historians still argue whether these stones were ever used directly against the mother's body or served more as symbolic anchors of divine protection. Tonight you'll observe the first act selecting the candidate stones. Before dawn, the midwife ventures into the temple's subterranean storerooms, lit by flickering torches. Shelves heave under hundreds of sculpted slabs, some smooth as water-worn pebbles, others jagged with natural fissures. Each is believed to carry its own elemental essence, earth, water, or blood. Oddly, some scholars suggest these classifications may have stemmed from Spanish misinterpretations of Nahuatl terms, but indigenous codices clearly reference color-based groupings tied to Tlazolteotl, goddess of purification and childbirth. You watch as the midwife, wrapped in a mantle dyed with cochineal, runs her fingers across the stone surfaces. She hums a lullaby-like chant, invoking Chantico, the hearth goddess, an unexpected twist that hints at domestic associations overshadowed by martial narratives of the Aztec Empire. A fringe account records that some midwives insisted on stones with faint crystalline veins, believing them to have absorbed lunar energy during full moons. Whether this is poetic license or genuine folk practice, no one can say for sure. With 6 stones spread before her, the midwife begins the touch test. Legend holds that stones chosen must be neither too heavy to cause fatigue in labor, nor too light to lack stability. You lean in as she balances each on her palm, closing her eyes, listening to the muted echo your fingertips create when tapped. One stone, pale white with subtle pink striations, emits a hollow thump that resonates like a distant heartbeat, a mainstream technique described in colonial-era Codex Mendoza. This resonance test, scholars still debate, may have measured internal crystalline structure rather than spiritual favor. Then comes the temperature ritual. Each stone is pressed against her inner wrist. You shiver as you see her skin blanch, then flush, interpreting warmth as a sign of the stone's ability to comfort a laboring mother's trembling body. In one account from Bernardino de Sahagun's Florentine Codex, midwives heated stones over copal embers to gauge heat retention. Historians still argue whether this was practical or purely ceremonial. Next, she applies a thin smear of pulque, lightly scented with marigold petals, to each candidate. The herbal anointment is said to reveal hidden markings, veins that appear under the liquid's sheen like secret runes. You watch droplets bead along fine fractures as if the stone itself is bleeding memories of past births. A quirky tidbit suggests midwives sometimes whispered instructions into the pulque before application, believing it carried their blessings into the stone's pores. No clear evidence exists, but it's a delicious image. And then, color divination. She studies each hue under torchlight. The deep garnet of one stone evokes Saipe Totec's life-death rebirth cycle. The pale alabaster of another suggests purity and new beginnings. Some midwives recorded color omens for each day of the month, creating a calendrical guide. You note how she refers to a small pottery calendar, an artifact scholars still debate as being Aztec original or Spanish influenced. Finally, she places the chosen stone on a woven mat before an obsidian mirror reflecting flickers of torchlight across its surface. Temple priests chant in low tones, invoking Quatlicu, the mother of gods, seeking her approval through the mirror's gaze. The mirror ritual modern researchers propose served both as psychological coda and as a pragmatic check, ensuring the stone faced no hidden flaws before being used under the expectant mother. With a soft nod, the midwife scoops up the singular chosen stone, its surface cool and smooth in her hands, and holds it over a bowl of rose petals and water. A final heartbeat resonance test follows. She presses it to her own chest, aligning its pulse with her heart's. If the rhythms sync, the stone is deemed protective enough to guide labor. You feel a momentary tremor, as if the stone thrums beneath her garments. In that hush, the birthing stone is declared ready. No open flame erupts, no war drums, thunder. Instead, there's a reverent silence, punctuated only by distant temple bells. You realize you've watched centuries of tradition condensed into these careful gestures, each rooted in the Aztec blend of science, spirituality, and sensory precision. As the midwife wraps the stone in a cloth dyed with copal resin, you step back, feet tingling, mind buzzing. You've witnessed the selection of a birthing stone, a ritual that marries practicality with the mystical devotion of an empire built on blood and maize. The stone will soon travel to a mother's threshold, where it will cradle newborn life amid chants of healing and renewal. You settle deeper into the hushed glow of the birthing chamber, the chill of stone underfoot, exchanged for the warm scent of copal smoke curling in lazy spirals overhead. The chosen birthing stone lies wrapped at the center of a woven mat. But before it can fulfill its sacred purpose, it must be cradled by hands worthy of its power. Tonight you watch how a young woman becomes a Temalacatl, midwife, the guardian of life's miraculous threshold. From the moment the dawn's first light tints the temple's jade pillars, pink candidates appear at the great courtyard of the House of Midwives. These women, some as young as 16, others in their early 20s, carry offerings of maize dough and marigold petals, learning early that service demands both humility and ritual. Mainstream sources note that midwives were selected for qualities of patience, compassion, and clear speech, often tested through public examinations of their knowledge of herbal tonics and birth prayers. Historians still debate whether these examinations were formal assessments orchestrated by temple authorities or informal trials held within family lineages. But either way, the selection process was as rigorous as any artisan's apprenticeship. You watch as one girl steps forward, her eyes bright and voice steady as she recites the invocation to Ixchel, the goddess of childbirth and weaving. The gathered elders, gray-haired Temalacatl, whose hands have guided thousands of births, exchange approving nods. In their weathered faces, you can read the weight of countless dawns spent waiting by labor fires, listening to laboring women's cries and comfort songs. Her training begins immediately. Under the tutelage of a senior midwife, she moves through a day divided between practical drills and spiritual discipline. She learns to mix poultices from maize silk and copal resin, mainstream recipes that purportedly eased contractions, and to tie a midwife's sash, a long strip of dyed cotton that doubles as a support strap and a symbol of her office. Scholars still argue whether the sash's stripes represented specific deities invoked during childbirth or marked levels of seniority within the midwife's hierarchy. You lean forward as the trainee midwife practices kneeling and rising with weighted pots balanced on her head, an early test of endurance, since true midwifery could demand hours of standing in the low light and heavy scents of incense. A quirky tidbit whispers through the courtyard. Some trainee midwives are said to chew cacao beans before long ceremonies, believing the invigorating bitterness sharpened their concentration and steadied their hands. Whether this was an official part of training or a whispered folk custom, the image of sharply clad girls with bits of chocolate-colored paste at their lips is both charming and oddly vivid. As midday sun filters through latticed stone windows, the trainees gather in a circular hall lined with codices illustrating birth positions and chants. Here they learn the 4 cardinal labor postures: squatting, kneeling, reclining with support and upright swaying, each demonstrated by an elder with the grace of a dancer. You can almost feel the echo of their footsteps as the trainees practice each movement, their knees whispering against stone floors. Historians still debate whether these positions were devised purely for mechanical advantage or held symbolic resonance tied to the cardinal directions and the four elements. Between drills, the midwives engage in ritual purification, bathing in water, steeped with marigold petals, then anointing themselves with scented oils. You watch the trainee's skin gleam as the elder midwife presses a small dab of emerald green tallow made from the fat of ritual deer into her temples, murmuring a prayer, asking Chalchiotlicue, goddess of rivers and lakes, to wash away fear. The mainstream record recognizes this as a form of psychological conditioning, preparing the midwife's mind for the intensity of labor, while fringe scholars argue it also linked her to the life-giving power of water. In either case, you can almost taste the mineral tang of green deer fat on the air. As dusk gathers, the trainees participate in a memorization ceremony under the open sky. Fire torches, set at the four compass points, cast long shadows, while each midwife in training must recite the precise sequence of chants that awaken the birthing stone's protective spirits. One by one, you hear lines like, "O gentle, Tlazolteotl, cleanse the passage of life," and "O fierce, Itzpapalotl, guard the threshold," each invocation timed to the flicker of flame. A scholarly debate still flares over whether these chants predate Spanish contact or were codified afterwards from oral traditions, but the power in the precise syllables is undeniable. Finally, the trainee undergoes the oath of service, placing her hand on the birthing stone itself, not the one used for labor, but a consecration stone. As her palm meets the cool surface, she pledges to uphold the temple's laws, to speak only words of comfort, in labor to never abandon a mother alone, and to treat every newborn as a sacred trust. You feel your own breath hitch as the stone's edge presses into her skin, binding her will to its ancient purpose. When the oath is complete, the senior midwives drape a cord of braided Magi fibers around her neck, an emblem of her official status. The crowd parts respectfully as she steps forward, now fully healed of her initial tremors, her face calm and resolute. A final fringe detail, some elders whisper that the cord must be knotted precisely 72 times to ensure the midwife's devotion mirroring the number of days the goddess Xochiquetzal spent in ritual seclusion before granting her blessings. Exact proof is scant, but the ritual's power is real. You exhale as the new Teotcalli turns her gaze to the chamber's entrance, ready to guide her first labor. The courtyard falls silent. Even the wind seems to pause. You've witnessed the sacred transformation of a young woman into a keeper of life. You realize this calling is more than a job. It's a covenant woven from stone song and unwavering compassion. You cradle the birthing stone in your hand and feel its weight settle into your palm like a secret. The midwife's chamber is dim now, only the thin shafts of torchlight dancing over polished walls, shadows flickering like silent witnesses. Before you lies the heart of the ritual, understanding the elemental essence that each stone carries. Because among the Aztecs, these stones were never mere rock. They were thought to breathe with earth water or blood, each element offering its own form of guidance and protection during the throes of labor. The midwife begins with the earth stones, those hewn from deep temple quarries and marked by mossy veins of green and brown. She lays them out on a mat of woven reeds and instructs you to close your eyes and feel the stone's gravity. You probably won't survive this without a moment of vertigo, as the heaviness seems to anchor you in the earth itself. Mainstream accounts tell us that earth stones were prized for providing stability, the idea being that their density could steady a mother during her contractions. Historians still argue whether these stones were actually denser than others, or if the perception of weight came from ritualized suggestion. As you inhale the faint scent of damp soil, copal mixing with stone dust, you watch the midwife press the largest earth stone against your belly. You flinch as a cool tremor runs through you, and she nods. Stability confirmed. Earth stones, she explains in a soft, conspiratorial tone, are like the roots of the world, unmoving, patient, unwavering. She jokes, only half in jest, that if your labor feels like a wild horse, this stone is the fence to tame it. You smile, though your arms shake a little. Next come the water stones, smooth as river-worn pebbles and streaked with pale blue or milky white. They huddle together like a school of fish carved from moonlight. The midwife dips her fingers into a basin of water, scented with marigold petals, and runs them along each stone's surface. You lean closer to watch droplets bead and fall away, imagining the stone's pores drinking in the liquid before releasing it slowly, just as a mother's body releases the lifeblood of birth. Mainstream sources note that water stones were believed to ease pain and encourage smooth passage, echoing the fluidity of water itself. Historians still argue whether the rituals involving immersion were borrowed from neighboring Maya practices or indigenous to the Valley of Mexico. You watch her perform a water whisper. She brings the rim of a stone to her lips and whispers a chant invoking Tlaloc, the rain god, then holds it beneath her ear to hear a faint rush of water, as if a hidden spring flows inside. Fringe scholars speculate this was an auditory illusion created by hollow cavities in the rock, while others swear they heard genuine echoes of running water. You can't decide, but it gives you chills. She places a water stone against your temple, and you taste copper at the back of your throat. Metallic, sharp cleansing. She smiles and murmurs, "This one will guide the amniotic waters." It feels oddly reassuring. You shift your fingers and imagine the stone's cool surface pooling warmth into your skin. Finally, she unveils the bloodstones deep crimson or spotted with veins of rust-red, crude reminders of life's essence. These are the rarest, only selected if the mother's health or the baby's vitality seems precarious. You lean in, breathing in the iron-tinged dust as the midwife holds each to her palm, watching for the faintest blush of warmth. Mainstream codices mention that bloodstones were used sparingly, believed to guard against postpartum hemorrhage and grant strength. Historians still argue whether their use was widespread or limited to royal births, given the scarcity of these stones in temple stores. Here's a quirky tidbit. One 16th century friar wrote that some midwives believed bloodstones were once formed when the goddess Coatlicue wept upon hearing her daughter's destiny, her tears crystallizing into deep red gems. Whether that's poetic fiction or genuine myth, the image of divine sorrow made corporeal in stone sends a shiver through you. The midwife holds a bloodstone to your wrist and you feel a pulse, slow at first, then matching your heartbeat. She nods, gravely. This stone knows your life's rhythm. You swallow suddenly, aware of your own pulse, echoing in your ears. In a hushed voice, she reminds you that labor is a blending of these elements. Too much grounding and the birth stalls. Too much fluidity and things rush uncontrollably. Blood too fierce and the mother may weaken. The right stone chosen with care keeps the balance. Then comes the test of elemental harmony. She places one earth, one water, and one bloodstone in a circle around the chosen birthing slab. You kneel in the center. With eyes closed, you feel the three energies converge, roots anchoring you, currents soothing you, lifeblood fortifying you. Historians still argue whether midwives intended this as a form of guided meditation or if it was a purely symbolic convergence. But as you sit there, breathing in unison with the stones, you understand why they believed in this triad. As the ritual nears completion, the midwife sprinkles ground maize and copal ash over the stones, sealing their essence into the space. You watch the ash drift and settle, like the final punctuation on a sacred text. Then, in a final flourish, she brushes each stone with a few drops of pulque, sealing their bond with life's sweetness. You rise head light, feeling the chamber tilt just slightly as you step away. The stones remain earth water, blood, arranged in perfect balance, and you realize that this elemental ritual, repeated for generations, is less about superstition and more about connection, connecting mother to earth, to fluid, to life's own current. Tonight you witness the true heart of Aztec midwifery, the belief that birth is more than biology. It's an elemental journey guided by stone song and ritual precision. As you walk back toward the courtyard, torchlight at your back, you carry with you the echo of those stones, steady fluid, vital in the steady beat of your own heart. The torch's flames gutter low as the midwife gathers the next phase of stone selection, shape, and texture. Under the canopy of woven reed mats, 6 stones wait each, with its own contour grain and story. You lean in keen to see how these silent guides reveal their suitability through touch alone. First, she invites you to run your fingers along the curvature of each stone's edge. One is crescent-shaped, its arc smooth, like the curve of a mother's belly. Another resembles a flattened oval, broad and supportive. Historians still debate whether these shapes were intentionally carved by artisans or simply chosen from naturally occurring river stones, but the ritual clearly values their form. Mainstream sources note that midwives favored stones that could cradle a mother's back or pelvis without digging into flesh, an ergonomic consideration centuries before modern obstetrics. Next comes the surface texture test. You close your eyes, palms hovering just above the stones, and let the midwife guide your hand. You discern one stone's velvety patina, reminiscent of polished obsidian, another's faintly pitted surface like tiny craters on a moonlit rock. She explains, voice low, that a stone must feel alive, its micro-variations speaking of its geological journey. Fringe researchers argue these textures helped channel bodily fluids away from the mother during labor, ensuring a safer birthing surface, while others view it purely as symbolic resonance with the earth's skin. Then she demonstrates the pressure point assessment. Placing each stone against her fingertips, she presses gently to identify any hot spots where the stone might irritate soft skin or pinch muscle. You watch her brow furrow slightly as she examines a stone with subtle ridges. She murmurs that sharp ridges might agitate nerves, causing discomfort during contractions. Historians still debate whether midwives truly understood the basics of pressure distribution, or if this practice arose from centuries of trial and ritual refinement. A particularly odd detail emerges when she picks up a stone that to the eye seems unremarkable, smooth, but nondescript. As she turns it in her palm, you notice a faint, almost imperceptible spiral pattern on its surface. She holds it under torchlight, rotating until the pattern glints like a hidden watermark. This is the mark of the Sinistli quarry, she explains. According to some codices, stones from that quarry share a unique spiral texture believed to channel spiritual energy. Historians still argue whether the spiral is purely geological or crafted by long-ago priests. Now comes your turn, the balance trial. The midwife instructs you to lift each stone with both hands and hold it at chest height, elbows bent. The test isn't weight alone, it's how the stone's center of gravity aligns with your own. One stone, despite being heavier on paper, feels almost weightless as you cradle it. Its flat base aligns perfectly with your palms, distributing force evenly. Another wobbles, demanding constant micro-adjustments. She smiles at your struggle and says a birthing stone should steady the midwife's arms, not tire them. It's a lesson in kinesthetic empathy, understanding how an object's geometry interacts with the human body. Between each lift, the midwife rubs the stone's edges with a soft cloth, whispering a brief incantation to Omatochtli, god of artisans and artisanship. Some believe this ritual invocation softened the stone's hardness, imbuing it with a more yielding spirit. Others see it as a psychological tool, reinforcing the midwife's connection to the stone before labor begins. Finally, she performs the sound and stroke test, tapping each stone gently with a bone mallet and then stroking it along its length to listen for variations in pitch and friction. One stone emits a melancholic ring, another a muted thud, and a third a brisk, bright clink. The midwife closes her eyes, nodding as she habituates to each note. She explains that stones with a clear, sustained ring were believed to share their clarity with the mother's mind, helping her remain calm. Scholars still debate whether these auditory differences truly exist in similar minerals or if the midwife's expectation shaped their perception. At last, she sets aside 4 stones each, passing the shape and texture trials with distinction. But only one will become the birthing stone. The midwife runs her palm over the final candidates, one last time feeling for the perfect harmony of curved grain and resonance. When her fingers rest on a slate-gray oval with faint palm-sized depressions along its edge, she nods. This is the one, she whispers. You watch as she holds the chosen stone to the light, its surface ablaze with dancing highlights. It feels like watching a symphony coalesce from individual notes. The perfect shape cradles the midwife's hand. The texture echoes the skin's warmth. The balance sits just where muscle meets sinew. As she wraps the stone in a cloth dyed deep crimson, symbolizing life's blood and vitality, you realize how every nuance of shape and texture shaped this ritual. No step was arbitrary, no stone chosen without deliberation. It's a testament to centuries of embodied knowledge passed down through tactile tradition and spiritual devotion. You breathe deeply, absorbing the weight of that legacy. In the silence, the chamber seems to hum with potential, the promise of new life and the quiet triumph of practical ritual. You step back, mind alive with stone in hand, ready for the next chapter of this ancient sacred practice. You settle into the hush after the tactile exploration, the birthing stone wrapped in crimson cloth beside you as the midwife prepares the next sacred test-color divination. The chamber's torchlight slants across your vision, illuminating the 6 unwrapped stones laid before her. Each hue holds a coded meaning, a spectrum of divine signals about the mother's journey to come. You feel that at any moment the right shade will call out, revealing its gift for guiding life into the world. First, she steps toward the garnet-red stone, its surface recalling the sheen of fresh pomegranate seeds. She holds it aloft, turning it in the torch's glow. Red speaks of Xipe Totec, she murmurs, invoking the flayed god of renewal. Mainstream records note that red hues were associated with blood's life force and used when midwives expected a challenging birth requiring strength and vitality. Historians still argue whether these associations derive directly from pre-Aztec cultures in central Mexico or were refined by later temple priests. But the red stone's promise of power is undeniable. You listen as she traces a finger along the stone's edge, watching how the light refracts through micro-fissures like molten bronze. If the mother's spirit wavers, this will fortify her, the midwife says, her voice steady. You imagine a mother gripping this stone during a contraction, its warmth stoking her resolve like embers under charcoal. Next, she lifts a snow-white stone, cool and smooth, almost translucent at the edges. Its pale glow reminds you of moonlight's gentle caress. White is for purity and calm, she explains, referencing goddess Chalchutlicue's association with cleansing waters. Mainstream codices record that white stones were chosen when a mother's temperament was anxious, believed to lull her toward serenity. Historians still debate whether white stones were genuinely less dense, thus cooler, or if that perception was woven through ritual narrative, but the comfort they offered is clear in the chants that accompanied their use. You close your eyes as she holds the white stone near your forehead. The cool breath of stone slides over your brow, and you feel tension in your shoulders ebb. It's as if a watery veil descends, muffling distant thoughts. Even if this is imagination, midwives spoke of its power as though it flowed from the stone's very essence. Then comes a pale blue stone flecked with streaks of silver that glint like stars. You swear you see patterns shifting as she tilts it, constellations born in rock. This hue channels Tlaloc's rain, she whispers, invoking the rain, God's mercy in easing labor pains. Mainstream accounts mention blue or green stones for regulating fluid balance, a nod to water's soothing properties. Historians still argue whether the blues were sourced from local mines or traded from distant regions, pointing to Atlitic Obsidian quarries or Orizaba's highlands. But the rarity of true blue makes these stones prized. The midwife brings the blue stone to her lips and inhales the scent of marigold-infused pulque, swirling in the air. She presses it to her palm, murmuring a rain chant before nodding satisfied. In that moment you feel as though droplets tingle on your skin, conjuring the rhythm of a gentle rainfall, coaxing life from parched earth. She sets the blue aside and picks up a golden yellow stone, sunlit in the torch's flame. It seems to glow from within, as if capturing the dawn's first rays. Yellow calls Huitzilopochtli's vigor, the midwife intones referencing the hummingbird god's fiery strength. Mainstream glyphs record yellow stones for births at sunrise, believed to imbue newborns with courage and drive. Historians still debate whether these yellow hues came from polished limestone or calcite, each source offering different mineral properties but the symbolic link to solar energy remains potent. You lean forward as she balances the yellow stone on her fingertips. It hums with warmth, warming your palm. When she brings it close to your heart, you feel a surge of energy, as though the sun itself pulses beneath your breastbone. It's eerie, but nobody questions rituals when they work. Next, she unveils a forest green stone, its surface mottled like a living moss carpet. Green is for growth, she says, channeling Xochipilli's floral aspects. Mainstream botanical treatises suggest green stones were used to support umbilical healing and postpartum recovery. Historians still argue whether the green pigments derived from jade sources in Guerrero or from Central American trade with Mixtec artisans, but the verdant shimmer of these stones always impressed temple scribes. She brushes the green stone's face with a strip of aloe-infused cloth, and then presses it to your palm. You taste sweetness on your tongue, as though you're biting a cucumber in a hidden garden. It feels cool, but nurturing, a cradle for new green life sprouting within the womb. Finally, she reveals a dusky purple stone, flecked with flecks of white like mountain peaks. Its regal hue suggests twilight skies and sacred thresholds. Purple weaves twilight's mystery, she explains in a hushed tone, naming Metzli, the moon goddess, whose cycles mirror childbirth's phases. Fringe scholars delight in citing late-period manuscripts that describe purple as a lunar symbol adopted after Aztec contact with Mayan astronomy, while mainstream codices hold that Nahuatl speakers used purple primarily in royal contexts. Either way, purple stones were reserved for high status or spiritually significant births, the final and most secretive choice in color divination. She places the purple stone against her temple, then holds it over the center mat. Flickering light reveals subtle bands of lavender and plum running through its core like ripples in the twilight sky. She nods slowly, her eyes reflecting that dusk-like glow before aligning it next to the crimson-wrapped birthing stone. You sense the air shift as though a dimensional door opens and closes with the stone's presence. Now comes the critical moment, color harmony. The midwife leans over the 6 stones, chanting softly in Nahuatl. Each hue responds. Red's warmth deepens, white glows, blue ripples, yellow brightens, green shimmers, purple pulses. The torches waver as though struck by an unseen breeze. You hold your breath as she steps back, surveying the chromatic chorus. She murmurs that the perfect birthing stone harmonizes 2 complementary hues, strength and serenity, vitality and calm. You watch as she places the uprooted crimson cloth next to the chosen slate-gray birthing stone, then lays a single mote of powdered red ochre almost imperceptibly on its surface. The flame flickers throwing a slanted beam that catches the ochre like fire trapped mid-flight. That tiny spot of color, neither too red nor too bold, completes the ritual. In that hush you realize the color divination is less about guessing and more about balance, balancing the mother's needs against elemental forces, marrying the demands of body and spirit. It's a spectrum of trust cast in stone and ritual. As the midwife wraps the red-dusted birthing stone in fresh linen, this time embroidered with golden yellow thread, you feel the ritual's weight settle around you. The air is thick with potential, like sky before a twilight storm. You exhale slowly, your vision cooling to normal. Tonight you've seen color speak words older than any chant. Words of life, of balance, of elemental synergy. As you step back into the corridor, torchlight dancing in your periphery, you carry with you the memory of hues aligned in sacred purpose and the profound sense that even in the darkest chamber, color can light the way. You sit in the circle of torchlight as the midwife prepares the next rite, sound of stone. 6 stones rest before her, each humming with silent potential. In the Aztec birthing tradition, sound was no accident. It was revelation. By tapping and listening for echoes, midwives discerned the hidden language of stone, believing its resonance foretold the labor's rhythm. Tonight you will learn how sound becomes a guide for birth. She begins with a bone mallet carved from the hollow limb of a deer and polished until it gleams like ivory. It feels light in her hand, yet resonates with purpose. She taps the first stone, a reddened garnet with a soft, steady strike. The note rings clear and short, like a heartbeat caught in stone. You lean in, feeling the vibration tremble through the floorboards and into your chest. Mainstream codices note that a clear, steady ring was prized. It promised, and even labor contractions, paced by the mother's own pulse. Historians still debate whether Aztec mallets varied in density to produce different tonal qualities, but the clarity of that single note leaves no doubt of its meaning. Next, the midwife taps a pale blue waterstone. The tone is deeper, with a muffled echo that trails off like water draining from a shell. You hear it as a gentle whoosh, almost like the distant crash of waves. She closes her eyes, nodding. This stone speaks of flow, she murmurs. It will guide the waters of birth, amniotic, physical, emotional, toward calm release. Fringe scholars suggest that stones with internal flaws produced lingering echoes, and that midwives used this trembling ring as a measure of a stone's internal breath. Whether structural or symbolic, the waterstone's note feels like a whisper in your ear. Then comes a forest green stone, mottled and textured. Her tap produces a muted thud, then a low rumble that hums under your bones. You lean forward, imagining the echo rippling through roots and moss. She says, "Green calls growth." It resonates with life in the body placenta umbilical cord renewal. You sense that the slow rolling sound suggests patience, endurance, a birth that may require steadfast resolve. Mainstream manuals mention green stones for postpartum recovery, credited with ongoing support even after the baby arrives. Historians still argue if the heaviness of some green minerals, in particular jadeite, was intentionally selected for deep-weighted tones, but the echo in this chamber is undeniable. Her gaze moves to the snow-white stone. She taps it carefully. The sound is bright and crystalline, with a brief but piercing ring that snaps back like a dropped obsidian blade. It's startling in contrast to the green stone's low rumble. She smiles faintly. White brings clarity. She explains a mind sharpened to each breath and contraction. You feel a prickle of awareness. Your senses heighten, as if the world around you paused. Historians still debate whether white stones emitted sharper echoes due to denser crystalline structure, but in practice, midwives associated that brightness with focused intention. Next, she presents a golden yellow stone, sunlit and warm. The strike is crisp, yet rounded a tone that bites before melting into a soft afterglow. It rings like dawn's first crow, bold but kind. Yellow, she says, is the voice of the sun god, assertive, energizing. It will give the mother strength for each peak. You think of the energy needed to push through contractions and imagine that ring fueling determination. Mainstream temple scrolls record that yellow stones were used for mothers in early labor to ignite vigor. Fringe texts claim that some craftspeople enhanced the stone's acoustic qualities with fine incisions, tiny grooves, acting as sound chambers, but evidence remains inconclusive. Now comes the dusky purple stone, rare and regal. The mallet's tap wavers between two tones, a deep bass and a fleeting treble, a duality that echoes like a conversation. You sense a dialogue unfolding, one voice commanding the other, soothing. She nods approvingly. Purple weaves twilight's duality, power and peace together. It will hold both the mother's strength and her calm. Historians still argue whether purple-hued minerals possessed natural fissures that created harmonic overtones, but midwives revered that layered resonance as balancing forces. Finally, she lifts a blood-red stone flecked with rust spots. The tone is short and percussive, with a crackle of urgency. It reverberates like life's urgent drumbeat, every strike echoing in your chest. She taps it twice, then listens in silence. This, she says softly, is the heartbeat's echo. It quickens attention to each moment, alerting the midwife to swift action, if needed. Mainstream chronicles note bloodstones were sometimes reserved for high-risk births where swift response could save lives. Historians still debate whether the internal porosity of certain red stones created crackling echoes, but the urgency in that note is unmistakable. With all 6 stones voiced, the midwife begins the resonance sequence. She taps each in turn, following a rhythmic pattern: earth green, blood red, water, Blue, purity. White, vigor. Yellow, duality. Purple, each tone. Low rumble, urgent. Crackle, gentle. Whoosh, bright. Ring, warm glow. Layered. Conversation sings in your bones. You close your eyes and feel the sequence fold around you like a sonic tapestry, mapping the journey ahead. Steadiness, life's urgency, fluid release, mental clarity, empowering strength, balanced calm. Then comes the harmonic test. She brings the chosen birthing stone forward and taps it once. The ring is a pure combination of the earlier echoes, rooted in the low hum, quickened by the crackle, softened by the lull. It speaks of integration of all elemental qualities converging. You feel a thrill. That single note holds every lesson you've witnessed so far. Tactile shape, temperature, color, elemental depth, transformed into sound. She turns to you and offers the mallet. Listen closely, she says. You raise it and tap the birthing stone yourself. The echo ripples through the chamber, then fades into a resonant hum at the edges. In that moment you understand why sound mattered. It revealed what touch and sight could only hint at. It became the final arbiter, an audible oath between stone and midwife, promising harmony in labor. The midwife gathers the 6 support stones and sets them aside. But she keeps the birthing stone, wrapped its voice, echoing in the stillness. You exhale, letting the pattern settle into your mind. The earth, the blood, the water, the purity, the vigor, the duality, all voiced through stone. Tonight, you discovered the sonic heart of Aztec midwifery, where birth's rhythm is guided not just by muscle, but by melody. As you step back into the corridor's cool air, the last echo fades. You carry in your chest the memory of that resonant ring, as if your heartbeat now knows a new rhythm. The midwife's chant lingers. Let the stone sing and life will follow its tune. You smile, feeling the echo of sacred sound, guiding you forward. The air grows thick with fragrance as the midwife reaches for a collection of herbal anointments, each steeped in layers of meaning and function. You watch her hands move with purpose, selecting small bowls of pulque, marigold oil, and powdered cacao, ingredients that will unlock the stone's hidden secrets. In the Aztec tradition, anointments were more than mere cosmetics. They activated a stone's protective spirit and bridged the gap between Earth's gifts and human need. She begins with pulque, the sacred fermented maguey sap. You lean forward as she dips a slender reed brush into the milky liquid and paints the surface of the earth stone. Mainstream sources note pulque's central role in rituals, its mild narcotic effect believed to ease pain and open the mind to divine messages. Historians still debate whether midwives orchestrated pulque's fermentation specifically for childbirth ceremonies, or simply repurposed temple-stocked supplies, but its presence here is undeniable. As she strokes the stone, the pulqua's scent, tangy, yeasty, fills your nostrils. She murmurs a chant to Temalacatl, god of healing, asking him to infuse the stone with soothing strength. You sense the stone's surface glisten as if momentarily wet, and imagine it drawing in the liquid's potency. Fringe scholars suggest that pulque's viscosity could reveal microscopic fissures in the stone, highlighting weak spots invisible to the eye, while others insist the effect was purely symbolic, a way to mark the stone as alive with ritual life force. Next, she moves to marigold-infused oil, bright as sunrise and fragrant with floral sweetness. She dips her fingers into a bowl of golden oil, then presses them gently onto the water stone, tracing its contours. Mainstream botanical texts reference marigold Kempo al Xochitl for its anti-inflammatory properties used to soften tissue and reduce swelling. Historians still argue whether midwives truly understood its medicinal value, or whether the oil's vibrant color and association with the sun god afforded it greater ritual importance. But either way, marigold oil was prized in birthing contexts. You close your eyes as she rubs the oil around the stone's edge, envisioning blood vessels opening like petals in sunlight. The oil's warmth seeps into your palm. When she hands you a small smear, your skin feels smoother, as if the stone's roughness is melting away. Then comes a bowl of powdered cacao, its fine brown dust dusted with crushed rose petals. She scoops a pinch and sprinkles it over the bloodstone, chanting softly to Chicomacoat, goddess of maize and fertility. Mainstream ethno-historical accounts note cacao's sacred status and its association with life's sweetness. It was consumed in ritual drinks, but its powdered form on stones is less commonly documented. Fringe researchers claim cacao's theobromine content could provide mild cardiac stimulation, matching the heartbeat resonance test performed later, but mainstream scholars caution against ascribing pharmacological effects without solid evidence. You sniff at the fragrant dust, chocolate, and rose, an odd combination, yet surprisingly harmonious. She uses the cacao petals to highlight tiny veins in the stone, each grain settling into crevices so small they might have gone unnoticed. It's as if the stone itself accepts the anointment, glowing with renewed purpose. The midwife retrieves a mixture of copal resin, melted and perfumed with incense, and daubs it onto the white stone. The resin's smoke scent mingles with copal's earthy sweetness, invoking Tlazolteotl for purification. Mainstream codices describe copal as a purifier, cleansing spaces and bodies of negative energies, while historians still debate whether its use here was primarily spiritual or also served as an antiseptic coating. In either case, the resin leaves a thin protective film that catches the torchlight like amber. You watch as she warms the resin with her breath, then spreads it in fine lines across the stone. In those lines you imagine pathways for divine energy channels cut into rock to guide blessings down to a laboring mother's body. Finally, she unveils a pouch of amulet herbs, crushed, rosemary, dried marjoram, and a sprig of tlalchichtli, an herb linked to menstrual balance. She steeps them in flower water, distilled petals of rose and jasmine, and spritzes the purple stone, chanting an invocation to Metzli for lunar protection. Mainstream pharmacognosy texts note rosemary's stimulating properties, while marjoram is credited with calming spasms. Historians still argue whether these specific herbs were native Aztec crops or later introduced from Mediterranean trade, but their combined scent feels both electric and soothing. The mist settles on the stone like morning dew. You inhale the floral musk, feeling your senses heighten and your mind clear. The midwife nods, satisfied, as though the stones themselves have declared their readiness. Next comes the absorption test. She cups each anointed stone in a swath of cotton cloth, pressing gently to see how the oils and resins soak in. A stone that absorbs too quickly may lack the density to hold a ritual's power. One that remains slick may repel the blessings meant to anchor in its pores. You hold your breath as she unwraps the cloth from the chosen birthing stone, the crimson-wrapped oval from earlier. The cloth emerges lightly stained but mostly dry, indicating balanced absorption. She smiles, murmuring, "Perfect synergy." Then she performs the healing smear, taking the same oils and polka mixture. She anoints her own palm and touches it to her forehead, her temples, her heart, transferring the combined blessings back to her own body. Mainstream observations note this as a form of sympathetic magic, binding the midwife's intent to the stone's purpose. Historians still debate whether it also served to focus her mind akin to a modern mindfulness ritual, but its psychological effect is tangible. In the final moment of this phase, she places the birthing stone before a smoldering copal incense brazier, letting smoke drift over its surface. A hush falls as the swirling smoke envelops the stone, marking the completion of the anointment. You feel the chamber's energy shift, no longer inert, but vibrant, charged with potential. Stepping back, the midwife folds her hands, casting one last look at the stones arrayed before her. The birthing stone, now anointed with pulque oil, resin cacao, and herb water, gleams with embodied promise. You exhale, realizing you've witnessed a ritual where mundane ingredients, fermented sap petals, resin, converge with rock to form a conduit for life itself. The herb anointments have drawn out each stone's silent spirit and bound it to the midwife's divine trust. As you slip out into the corridor's cool air, the lingering scents of copal and cacao cling to your skin, a reminder that birth in the Aztec world was crafted with both scientific cunning and sacred devotion. The stones are ready, the mothers will be guided, and You carry the aroma of ritual precision with every breath. You remain hushed in the glow of copal embers as the midwife gestures toward the obsidian altar at the chamber's edge. Now comes the test of priestly oversight, where temple priests, guardians of divine law, sanctify the birthing stone before it touches mortal clay. This moment bridges midwifery's tactile precision with the empire's sacred order, ensuring every birth unfolds under the watchful eyes of the gods. Two yellow-robed priests enter the chamber, their headdresses of quetzal feathers swaying softly with each step. Their presence shifts the air. The flame light catches the gold leaf on their robes, casting dancing reflections across stone walls. Mainstream records note that priests in the Aztec world held authority over life's thresholds, birth, and death, and that midwives required their blessing to legitimize any ritual object. Historians still debate whether this oversight was a power play by temple elites to control childbirth practices, or a genuine collaboration built on mutual respect. But today, you witness their partnership firsthand. One priest, the Tlatoani of ritual, holds a carved wooden staff, topped with a miniature skull of white jade, a symbol of life born from sacrifice. He steps forward, examining the crimson-wrapped birthing stone from a distance. His fingers brush a fine ash pattern painted on his cheek, a sign that he has fasted for 3 days in preparation. A fringe anecdote suggests some priests performed self-flagellation in earlier times to share in the mother's pain, though mainstream sources dismiss this as later embellishment. Either way, his demeanor is solemn and expectant. The Tlatoani raises his staff and chants in low grounding tones, "O great Temalacatl, mothers of gods, witness this stone. Let it carry life as you carry the stars." You feel the words vibrate through the chamber, swirling with incense haze. The second priest, the Temalacatl scholar, unfurls a trifold codex page illustrating lunar phases and godly genealogies. He reads excerpts carefully, rhythmically in Nahuatl, invoking Chantico for home protection and Cihuacoatl for midwifery wisdom. Scholars still argue whether these specific deities were traditionally paired in birth rituals or if their association emerged under royal decree to standardize prayers. But the duo's joint invocation weaves tradition and authority together. Next, they perform the liquid libation, a shallow bowl of clear water sourced from the sacred Chapultepec spring, is passed to the midwife. She dips a feather fan into the water and fans the birthing stone, letting droplets mist its surface. The priests murmur that the spring's water symbolizes the source of life itself, pure and eternal. Historians note the Chapultepec site was considered holy long before Aztec ascendancy. Though some argue its incorporation into royal rituals was a calculated political move to co-opt earlier local sanctity. Regardless, the mist settles like dew on the stone, shimmering in torchlight. After the mist The Tlatoani sprinkles crushed jade dust, the finest particles of green stone, over the birthing slab itself. He declares, as jade endures, so may this mother's strength. Jade's reverence spanned Mesoamerica, prized for its hardness and symbolic link to fertility. Historians still weigh whether jade dust had any medicinal benefit when mixed with oils, or whether its value was purely emblematic, but in ritual use, it left a delicate sheen connecting stone to stone. Now comes the sacred inspection, the priests circling the stone in silence. You watch their feet move in measured steps, heel to toe, tracing an 8-point star pattern etched into the floor. This stencil, drawn in red ochre, aligns with cardinal directions and the 8-day lunar cycle. Mainstream ethnoastronomers note the Aztecs' sophisticated calendar required 8 directions, plus zenith and nadir, but some fringe researchers propose the floor pattern mirrored Tenochtitlan's layout of causeways and canals, embedding civic geography into ritual space. Either way, you see how they map heaven onto earth. As they finish the circle, the Kalmakak scholar raises his hand and sprinkles a pinch of copal pollen, bright yellow light as dust, over the birthing stone. The tiny grains flutter like golden snow, carrying prayers upward. He whispers to guide the soul's path once life emerges. Mainstream codices mention pollen as a conduit for messages to the gods, though it's unclear if this use was inherited from Maya predecessors or uniquely Aztec. The pollen sticking to the stone's cloth wrap leaves a faint starburst pattern, as if marking the birthing stone's new celestial contract. The priests then exchange a nod and place their hands atop the midwife's head, imparting a double blessing, one for the midwife's skill, one for the stone's purpose. You see her shoulders relax under their touch, as though weight has lifted. A moment of quiet empowerment in a chamber fraught with expectation. Fringe chronicles hint that some midwives considered this touch more potent than any herb or chant, but mainstream voices argue it was chiefly symbolic, reinforcing social cohesion among ritual specialists. Yet you sense in her gaze that it resonates deeply. Finally, the Tlatoani holds a feathered torch, bright braids of eagle plume aflame, and passes its light slowly around the birthing stone, as if sealing its anointment in fire's vigilance. The flickering glow reveals the final subtle spirit markings, a tiny spiraled indentation and a faint cross-hatched grid invisible before. Some say these mark the stone as belonging to both Earth and cosmos. Others argue they were natural inclusions, only revealed under dynamic light. Regardless, you witness their approval. With the ceremony complete, the priests step back, their roles fulfilled. The midwife unwraps the stone, now alive with ash pollen resin and codex prayers. You feel that by their passing hands, it has become more than aid. It has become an oracle, a guardian, a contract between gods and mortals. Stepping aside, you catch the midwife's eye. She nods nearly imperceptibly, acknowledging both midwives' and priests' trust. The birthing stone, sanctified by earthly caretakers and celestial overseers alike, now carries the seal of absolute authority. In that charged silence, you realize that in Aztec society, birth was never purely biological. It was a communal tapestry stitched by midwives' touch, priests' blessing, and stone's silent testimony. As you rise and retreat to the corridor's cool embrace, the echo of feathered prayers and crackling torches lingers, reminding you that in this world, every life begins with divine oversight. The midwife turns toward a curtained recess in the chamber where large basins of water simmer gently over low braziers. This is the domain of ceremonial baths, a ritual of purification that readies both stone and midwife, and by extension, the mother, for the sacred act of birth. As you step closer, the air thickens with steam, carrying hints of marigold and copal resin. Here, the elements merge, fire heating water, sanctifying stone, anchoring life. 6 clay basins stand like silent sentinels, each embossed with glyphs of waves, clouds, and hearts. Mainstream sources note that water held great symbolic power, fluidity, mirroring amniotic flow, cleansing, mirroring spiritual rebirth. While historians still debate whether the basin's glyphs reference specific deities or broader cosmological concepts, fringe scholars suggest the basins were once used for divining the moon's phases by water reflections repurposed here for birthrights. Either way, their presence feels primordial. The midwife selects the first basin, its glyphs denoting Chalchutlique, goddess of rivers, and childbirth's gentle currents. She ladles out a portion of the herbal infusion, a blend of marigold petals, chia seeds, and a sprig of rosemary that tingles with cooling promise, and pours it into the main basin's steaming water. The petals swirl like golden fish, and a soft hiss emerges as droplets hit warm water. She murmurs a prayer to Chalchutlique, asking for smooth passage and calm waters in labor. Next, she retrieves a second basin, marked with Tlaloc's lightning icon, invoking rain's power. Into its steaming water, she drops a sliver of obsidian, once gifted by temple priests, a sharp reminder of life's edge. The obsidian sinks with a muted clink, sending ripples across the surface. She intones as lightning splits the sky, "May this stone split the womb," in readiness, swift and sure. Mainstream chronicles mention obsidian as a guardian against malevolent spirits. Historians still debate whether the inclusion in water was protective or purely symbolic, but the effect is potent. The third basin bears the glyph of Xochiquetzal, goddess of flowers and fertility. Into this fragrant pool, the midwife sprinkles flower pollen, jasmine rose, and marigold, creating a floating carpet of petals. She adds a few drops of cacao-infused oil, swirling it into the water. The surface shimmers. She chants, "May beauty and fertility bless this birth." Scholars note Xochiquetzal's association with feminine art and pleasure. Prestigious midwives reportedly guarded this basin's recipe in secret codes. A fourth basin depicts Quetzalcoatl's serpent, symbolizing life's continuity. The midwife adds copal resin to the water, lighting it so the resin smolders atop the surface, releasing fragrant smoke. The resin drifts like mist mingling with steam. She whispers, "O feathered serpent cycle of life, guide this birth's renewal." Some researchers suggest the resin's antiseptic properties aided in hygiene. Others view it as purely spiritual, cleansing unseen forces. The fifth basin, showing a sun disk, honors Huitzilopochtli. The midwife pours in pula, a honey-like syrup made from maize and chia, sweet and viscous. The addition gives the water a golden hue. She chants, "Sun's warmth and strength fuel this woman's heart." Eyewitness accounts record pula as both nourishment and symbol of divine favor. Finally, the sixth basin bears the moon crescent again, calling Metzli. The midwife casts a handful of ground jade dust into the coolest corner of the basin, drawing upon lunar cycles. She intones softly, "Moon's pull, tides the mother's womb. Grant gentle guidance." Fringe lore holds that jade's cool touch regulates the body's heat during labor. Mainstream texts emphasize jade's status as life-affirming. With all basins prepared, the midwife kneels beside the birthing stone, now resting unwrapped on a reed mat. She dips a clean cloth into each basin, moving in clockwise order, mirroring the sun's path, and lightly wipes the stone's surface, inviting each element's blessing. You observe the stone's texture change, now glistening, now matte, now subtly perfumed, reflecting each basin's essence. Afterward, she washes her own hands in the final moon basin, drying them with a cloth woven from agave fibers. She sprinkles the water around the chamber's perimeter, creating a protective boundary. Mainstream ritual manuals describe this as both spiritual and practical, deterring insects from the birthing area, while historians still debate whether any antimicrobial benefits were known. Now, she beckons you forward. You reach into the basin of Chalchiutlicue, feeling water warm, yet weightless, redolent of flowers. You lift your soaked hands and pass them over the stone, almost in slow motion, watching as droplets bead and fall. Each basin you touch brings a new layer: stability, clarity, fertility, renewal, strength, and intuitive guidance. By the time you finish with lunar jade, the birthing stone seems to pulse with layered energies. The midwife stands and faces you. The stone carries earth and sky, sun and moon, river and storm, she says. No vessel could hold life without these blessings. You nod senses alive with the water's touch, and the chamber's charged hush. As she refills the basins and covers them with embroidered lids, the ceremony concludes. The birthing stone, cleansed, anointed, and washed in sacred water, is now imbued with the full spectrum of cosmic forces. It stands ready to cradle life in the chamber where water once purged the world's sorrows. Stepping back, you leave the birthing stone in its sanctified niche, steam rising like gentle incense. The midwife's chant lingers. By water's grace and stone's strength, life emerges, safe at length. You walk into the corridor's cool air, water's memory, clinging to your fingertips and breath. In the hush you realize that ritual baths were more than cleansing. They were a grand confluence of nature's elements transformed through water's alchemy into a promise of safe haven for both mother and child. You step back from the steaming basins and feel the chamber's air settle into calm anticipation. The birthing stone, now cleansed and empowered, rests at the center of the space. But its journey isn't complete until it receives its true identity, naming the stone. In Aztec tradition, a name is more than a label. It is a declaration of purpose, a binding vow that shapes destiny. Tonight you witness how midwives christen their chosen stones with sacred Nahuatl names, sealing their role in the miracle of birth. The midwife beckons you forward, and you kneel beside her as she produces a fine brush carved from the feather of a quetzal. Its emerald barbs glimmer in torchlight. Mainstream sources note that using quetzal feathers was reserved for high-status rituals, reflecting the bird's association with royalty and divine favor. Historians still debate whether feather choice signified midwife rank or matched specific deities invoked in the naming process, but the quetzal brush's sacred weight is undeniable. In her other hand, she holds a small pot of red ochre pigment mixed with pulque for smooth flow. She smiles at you, her eyes steady, and dips the brush. Then, in a deliberate gesture, she paints the stone's surface with a single glyph, a stylized spiral entwined with a maze ear. You feel your chest tighten. It's as if the stone now carries a living promise. Matlactli, she intones her voice low. The Nahuatl word means spiral of life. Mainstream ethno-historical dictionaries translate Matlactli literally as life's coil linking spiral motifs to the goddess Coatlicue's womb. Scholars still argue whether this glyph predates Aztec imperial design or evolved under post-contact codification, but its symbolism as birth's continuous cycle is universally acknowledged. The naming unfolds in stages. First, the midwife presents the glyph and speaks the name aloud 3 times, her tone rising like a chant. Each repetition resonates through the chamber, mingling with the stone's residual echoes from previous sound tests. By the 3rd utterance, you sense a shift, a subtle vibration that seems to settle into the stone's core. Next, she writes a second glyph. Alongside the spiral, 3 vertical lines, topped by a crescent. Exquichteletl, she says softly, adding the meaning pure fire. Mainstream codices associate 3 lines with the triad of earth, water, and blood, while the crescent evokes the moon's transformative power. Historians still debate whether triadic numbering was a widespread Aztec concept or a later scholastic interpretation, but its invocation here amplifies the stone's elemental balance. As she names Lexquichteletl for second-tier strength and purity, you watch her brush strokes mirror the flame's flicker. Each line morphs under the Quetzal brush, forging a connection between glyph element and birthing fate. Third, she pauses and gazes at you directly. Now the stone's voice, she says. She retrieves the bone mallet and taps the glyph-labeled surface once. The resulting ring is clear, sustained, and warmer in tone than before, an auditory validation of the name's power. Fringe researchers argue that engraving glyphs into stone alters its acoustic properties, reinforcing resonant frequencies tied to ritual outcomes. Mainstream scholars remain skeptical, insisting the auditory change is perceptual rather than physical, yet no one denies the mallet's call carries added weight here. With sound confirmed, the midwife moves to the final step, inscribing the mother's lineage. She produces a small piece of deer leather and, using a stylus, writes the expectant mother's name and town in shortened glyphic form. Historical records indicate that midwives often recorded this information on perishable materials. Codices suggest leather strips were common, though scholars still debate how frequently such personal data survived beyond the ritual itself. In your hands, the leather feels supple and warm, a living document of identity and origin. She wraps the leather around the stone's midsection, tying it with a megway fiber cord braided in a pattern matching the mother's family glyph. You note the cord's precise knots, 4 forward, 2 back, a counting pattern mirroring the mother's birth month in the Aztec solar calendar. Mainstream calendar studies confirm that midwives used calendrical codes to align birth rituals with cosmic cycles, while historians still argue whether such alignment affected outcomes or served chiefly symbolic purposes. Nevertheless, the chord's rhythm resonates with deeper meaning. Now comes the blessing of the name. The midwife raises the stone overhead and calls out, Matlachtli, Exquichteletl, spiral of life, in pure fire, carry the child of mother's name safely through the coil of birth, anchored in earth, guided by water, empowered by blood. Her words echo off stone walls, weaving a protective spell. You close your eyes, imagining the spiral glyph spinning the fire, glyph radiating warmth, and the leather cord binding mother to stone across space and time. She lowers the stone and breathes deeply. Then, with one final flourish, she stamps the leather cord's trailing ends with a drop of rose petal oil, ensuring the name's scent accompanies the stone into labor. Rose oil's inclusion sparks scholarly debate. Some assert it introduced antiseptic qualities. Others view it as poetic nod to Xochiquetzal's floral domain. Either way, the aroma clings to your skin long after the chamber's door closes. The midwife kneels and bows her head. You follow palms pressed together. In that bow ages of maternal devotion and ritual expertise converge into silent gratitude. The stone carrying its name and lineage now stands as a living talisman, ready to support the mother in the intense moments to come. As you step back into the corridor's cooler air, you can almost hear the whisper of the glyphs, a subtle sibilance weaving through the hush spiral of life. Pure fire. You carry the stone's new identity with you, its name echoing in your heart as you move toward the chamber's entrance, prepared for the next sacred ritual. You follow the midwife across moonlit courtyards to a modest Teocalli-style hut where the expectant mother awaits. Here begins the home blessing rite, a midwife-led ceremony, merging temple precision with familial warmth. The walls are adorned with woven reed mats and simple clay statuettes of Ixchel, goddess of childbirth. The hush of night is broken only by crickets and the distant call of an owl, reminders that life persists in every corner of Aztec territory, from grand temples to humble homes. First, the midwife places the named birthing stone at the hut's center on a small wooden pedestal crafted by the local carpenter. Mainstream sources note that local artisans often carved these pedestals from cypress or cedar woods, prized for their resistance to rot and their sacred association with renewal. Historians still debate whether these pedestals were standardized temple offerings or improvised based on household resources, but either way, their presence signals the fusion of formal ritual and domestic space. You step forward as the midwife retrieves a bundle of Maggie fiber cords, each dyed in family colors. She gently unfolds one and wraps it around the stone's base, tying a loose knot. This ties the stone's power to the home's hearth, she explains. Fringe scholars propose that the Magui fibers, when harvested under specific lunar phases, carried residual lunar energy into the binding. But mainstream ethno-historical accounts focus on the cord's symbolic function, linking stone home and mother in one unbroken circle. Next, the midwife lights a trio of tallow lamps, each made from rendered deer fat and adorned with copal resin for bright, steady flame. She arranges them in a triangle around the stone. You note how their amber glow casts dancing shadows on woven mats, evoking both sanctuary and transformation. Mainstream ritual manuals specify that the number 3 symbolizes the triad of birth's elements: earth, water, blood. Yet, historians still argue whether the triangle aligns with calendrical directions or emerged from pre-Aztec triune worship. Regardless, the flickering light has a mesmerizing quality, and you feel the hearth's warmth deepen the ceremony's intimacy. The midwife then produces a small ceramic bowl filled with maize dough tsawali. She shapes a tiny solar disk and places it before the mother's yoni-shaped mat, a gift of sustenance and sun, she says, invoking Tonatiuh, sun god of life's spark. You watch as she offers a pinch of dough to the mother, who tastes it with reverent eyes. Mainstream codices record Tsawali's role in both agricultural and life cycle rituals, symbolizing nourishment and cyclical renewal, while historians still debate whether the dough's recipe varied regionally to reflect local maize varieties or conformed to a strict temple standard. The dough's sweet, earthy flavor lingers, grounding you in the cycle of earth and harvest. Now comes the household incense, a mix of copal branches, dried marigold flower heads, and crushed cedar leaves. The midwife lights each component in turn, creating layered smoke that drifts across the stone and wreathes the mother and her kin. She chants, "Smoke of earth flowers and wood, cleanse. This space shed every fear. Let the child be born in comfort and peace." You inhale the resinous smoke, tasting citrusy sweetness and pine all at once, calming and clarifying. Fringe ethnobotanists speculate that cedar compounds might have acted as mild insect repellents, keeping pests from the birth area. Mainstream sources credit the incense solely with spiritual purification. In either case, the swirling smoke wraps the room in sanctity. The midwife then invites the mother's closest kin, usually her mother, sisters, or aunts, to step forward. Each places a handprint in soft white lime plaster applied earlier to a section of the wall. You watch pale handprints bloom like ghostly flowers, binding generational support to the ritual. Mainstream anthropological studies note that communal handprinting appears in other Mesoamerican rites as a visual covenant. Historians still debate whether the mosaic of prints served a practical role mapping clan territory within the hut, or functioned purely as symbolic witness. Either way, the handprints add a human texture that no temple ceremony could replicate. Next, the midwife administers the heartbeat resonance, pressing the birthing stone against the mother's chest. You lean in as the mother's ribcage rises and falls. The stone seems to meld to her pulse. Through this contact, midwives believed they calibrated the stone's protective frequency to the mother's unique rhythm. Mainstream colonial-era accounts describe this practice in detail. Historians still argue whether this was an actual pulse-reading technique or a ritualized metaphor for empathetic communion. Whatever the case, as the mother closes her eyes, you feel the hush deepen, as if time itself synchronizes to a single heartbeat. With the heartbeat aligned, the midwife performs the hearth invocation. She pours 3 small scoops of warmed water from the Chalchutlaku basin collected earlier into a shallow stone dish before the fire. Each scoop releases a gentle hiss as steam rises. She sprinkles dried rosemary and marigold petals into the water, then dips her fingers and brandishes tiny crossed obsidian blades over the flame, creating sparks that sparkle like living stars. You flinch as a tiny ember lands on the mother's temple, and she bats it away, unflinching, a testament to ritual familiarity. Scholars still debate whether the crossed blades represented dual protective deities or served as a practical means to ward off malevolent spirits attracted to water's surface. The combined scent of burning leaves and hot water becomes a sensory seal over the rite. Finally, the midwife holds the stone aloft and declares, "By hearth's flame, by family's bond, by earth and sky, Temalacatl, Exquishtletl stands guard in your home. Walk into labor as you walk into dawn, cradled in love, anchored in spirit." The mother and her kin echo the blessings, their voices soft but firm. The birthing stone glows in the hearthlight, its glyphs sharp against the hushed backdrop. You feel a tremor in the air, as if the hut itself breathes in unified prayer. As the ceremony concludes, the midwife wraps the stone in a fresh cotton cloth printed with motifs of maize and water, then hands it to the mother. "Keep it by your side," she instructs. "When the time comes, let its presence remind you you carry both life and legacy." The mother cradles the stone against her belly, her posture a blend of awe and confidence. Stepping back into the cool night air, you carry with you the tactile memory of hearth warmth, the smoky swirl of incense, the mosaic of handprints, and the stone's reassuring weight. Tonight, you've witnessed how Aztec midwives wove temple precision into home comfort, sanctifying birth within the circle of family. You realize that birthing stones were not just tools, they were living threads stitching community cosmos and mother into a single tapestry of life. You step into the labor chamber at dawn, the first rosy light slipping between reed walls and torch embers flickering softly. At the center lies the birthing stone, wrapped in its embroidered cloth, waiting to bear its burden. But how it's placed beneath the mother can mean the difference between a guided birth and an ordeal. Tonight you learn positioning practices, the precise science of stone placement that Aztec midwives mastered to cradle both mother and child in optimal alignment. First, the midwife asks the mother to assume the upright squatting posture, feet planted firmly on woven mats and hands gripping a maize stalk support beam overhead. Mainstream ethno-historical accounts note that squatting was the most common Aztec birthing position, prized for widening the birth canal and utilizing gravity and ergonomic mastery centuries before modern obstetrics. Historians still argue whether squatting evolved organically from everyday life or was deliberately taught in Temalacatl houses. But its effectiveness is undisputed. With the mother steady, the midwife kneels behind her and unwraps the birthing stone. She holds it at chest level, murmuring a chant to Chalchiutlicue, to bless the stone's placement. You lean forward, breath hitching, as she slides the stone beneath the mother's buttocks, angling it just so tilted forward by about 15 degrees. This forward tilt encourages the baby's head to descend toward the vaginal opening with minimal maternal effort. It's said that the angle mirrors the hillside slopes around Texcoco Lake, integrating landscape geometry into childbirth. Fringe scholars delight in noting the similarity, suggesting midwives borrowed riverbank observations to refine their methods, while mainstream sources attribute the tilt to long practical refinement rather than nature mimicry. Next comes the lateral offset, a subtle shift of the stone an inch or two toward the mother's right hip. The midwife explains that this offset aligns the baby's optimal entry point with the mother's pelvic curve, reducing friction. Mainstream codices reference this practice under the term tlachpalo, meaning side resting, but historians still debate whether tlachpalo originally described general reclining or specifically stone placement. Either way, you feel the meticulous care. The stone isn't simply a prop, but a calibrated tool attuned to anatomical contours. Then she performs the height calibration. Using a slender wooden stick marked at handspan increments, she measures the vertical distance from the mother's ischial tuberosities, sit bones to the top of the stone. The ideal height, 3 handspans, sets the mother's pelvis at an angle that optimizes blood flow and eases contraction waves. You watch as she checks the mark, adjusting the stone's legs. Tiny wooden wedges, carved from cypress, until the measurement is exact. Mainstream observations confirm midwives kept such measuring sticks in their kits, though historians still argue over how standardized these tools were across different Temalacatl houses. A quirky tidbit surfaces when she places the stone's carved obsidian inlaid handles within easy reach of the mother's hands. Some elders claim that gripping obsidian, even if not used, provided subtle energy reinforcement, its volcanic glass absorbing pain signals and diffusing them through the stone's mass. Fringe texts mention midwives recommending obsidian handles for an extra layer of spiritual analgesia, while mainstream ethnographers remained skeptical, citing lack of direct testimony. Yet, you sense a charged energy as the obsidian glints in shaded light. With placement set, the midwife moves to the mother's leg supports. She guides the mother's calves onto 2 smaller stones, soothe, palm-sized and positioned at a 45-degree angle from the birthing stone. This support stone duo elevates the legs to open the pelvic outlet, further reducing muscular fatigue in the mother's thighs. Mainstream CT scans of recreated birthing positions show that such elevation can increase pelvic diameter, by up to 2 centimeters, an impressive ergonomic triumph for pre-industrial midwifery. Historians still debate whether this practice originated in highland regions, where reclining was impossible, on steep terraces or lowland areas where reeds provided flexible seating, but the leg support ritual is universally recorded. The midwife then places a flat water stone, one of the early elemental picks, beneath the mother's lower back, cradling the lumbar curve. She presses gently to confirm its contact, explaining that warmth and subtle flexibility in this region soothe muscle spasms during intense contractions. Mainstream herbal texts mention water stones' cooling properties, yet historians still argue whether this was based on stone temperature or the ritual chants that accompanied their use. You feel a soft relief, as if a hidden tension in your spine has loosened. Now for the sound alignment, the midwife taps each positioning stone with the bone mallet, listening for clear, crisp echoes. If a stone's placement silences its ring, she adjusts the angle imperceptibly until the note returns. Mainstream chronicles note that midwives believed uninterrupted resonance facilitated energy flow through the mother's body, synchronizing with the baby's descent. Historians still question whether these auditory cues were genuinely perceptible during labor's din, or functioned more as pre-labor confirmation. But the ritual precision is captivating. Next comes the herbal cushion, a poultice of maize silk and marigold petals, wrapped in thin cotton and laid atop the birthing stone surface. This soft layer prevents skin abrasion during prolonged contact and releases calming plant compounds onto the mother's skin. Mainstream pharmacological studies highlight anti-inflammatory properties in marigold, while historians still debate whether maize silk's supposed emmenagogue effects were intentional or coincidental. You inhale the poultice's earthy sweetness and imagine its quiet efficacy melding with stone's firmness. Finally, the midwife conducts the nexus alignment. She steps back and surveys the mother's overall posture, hips, legs, spine, in relation to the stone's placement. She ensures that the mother's center of gravity falls directly above the stone's midpoint, offering stability even as contractions sway her torso. Historians still argue whether midwives understood the biomechanics of center of gravity shifts or simply followed ancestral patterns. But anthropological reconstructions confirm that proper nexus alignment reduces labor duration by an estimated 15%. With everything in place, the midwife steps aside and allows silence to settle. The mother inhales and exhales, feeling the stones welcoming her body's contours. In that moment, you recognize that positioning practices were not random traditions, but a sophisticated choreography of anatomy, physics, and elemental synergy. You exhale, marveling at the interplay of torque and torque relief beneath the mother's weight. Each stone the birthing slab leg supports lumbar cradle serves a precise function, calibrated through generations of observation and ritual refinement. There are no abrupt shifts or jolts, only seamless support guiding life's threshold. As the mother begins her first contraction, you watch her lean forward onto the maize stalk, support fingers gripping obsidian handles, legs angled perfectly on their stone spine, cushioned against the cool water slab. You hear her breath hitch, and then, beneath it all, a faint echo, the birthing stone's clear ring, a reminder that even in stillness, sound and structure conspire to ease the way. You step back into the corridor's hush, the echo of calibrated stones ringing in your ears. Tonight, you've learned how Aztec midwives transformed stones into living cradles, turning raw rock into precision instruments of birth. And you carry with you the vision of stone and flesh aligned in ritual harmony, guiding life into the world, one careful placement at a time. The chamber's hush deepens as the mother's contractions roll through her like distant drums. You remain just outside the stone's halo, glow, observing the midwife step forward. For the labor whisperer, write a subtle dialogue between midwife mother and stone that guides timing, technique, and comfort. She kneels beside the mother's ear and whispers a chant so soft you lean in to catch it. Itzpal chilquao tlachinoli quetzal xochitl. These ancient words invoke Itzpapalotl's courage, Quetzalcoatl's wings, and Xochiquetzal's fertility in a single breath. Mainstream codices record that such whispers were thought to infuse the mother with divine names, strengthening her spirit. Historians still debate whether the words' power lay in their meaning or in the midwife's soothing tone, but their effect is palpable. The mother's face relaxes her breath, shifting from panicked gasps to measured moans. With each contraction, the midwife places a soft reed fan against the mother's neck, its beat timed to the birthing stone's echo. Fringe scholars suggest the rhythmic fan flicks simulate a heartbeat or breathing pattern, offering both comfort and a pace guide. Mainstream ethno-medical texts note its cooling effect, reducing feverish tension. You watch as the mother's shoulders lower, her hands unclench the obsidian handles, and her eyes focus on the stone's carved spiral. Then the midwife listens, really listens to the stone's response. She places her palm over the birthing stone's glyphs and closes her eyes, feeling its warmth and subtle tremors. Each micro-vibration tells her whether the mother should push rest or shift position. Mainstream sources reference pulse-reading stones. Historians still argue whether those vibrations were literal or metaphorical. But here, the midwife's certainty is unwavering. As the next contraction peaks, she whispers, "Push like maize, breaks husk, not like river, breaks dam." The metaphor, crisp, vivid, guides the mother's force, steady, controlled, purposeful. You feel the midwife's words settle in the air, anchoring the mother's intent. After the push, she hums a brief refrain, a lullaby-like cadence, helping muscles relax before the next wave. Between contractions, the midwife watches the leg support stones. If their ring dulls under pressure, she gently taps them with her mallet, reawakening their resonance. This quick ritual ensures the stone's full energy returns for the next effort. You note how her movements are almost imperceptible, a dance of care and precision. When progress slows, she guides the mother's hip sway, gentle rocking against the birthing stone's edge. She sings a single line of chant, Tlatoli, Tlayak, Tlayak, meaning the words of the earth, breathe. Mainstream anthropological studies equate this to Lamaze-style breathing prompts. Historians question whether the chant's literal translation mattered, or if its rhythm alone paced breathing. Yet, it works. The mother inhales deeply, tilting her pelvis forward in perfect sync with the stone's forward tilt. Now comes the mirror check. The midwife lifts a small obsidian hand mirror and positions it so the mother can glimpse her own face and the stone beneath her. Seeing the spiraled glyph as she exhales reminds the mother of the stone's protective promise. Fringe ethnographers propose that visual feedback reduces panic. Mainstream birth studies confirm that seeing progress can increase maternal control and reduce pain perception. You watch the mother's pupils soften and her grip relax. As labor intensifies, the midwife administers the heartbeat resonance once more, this time pressing the birthing stone firmly to the mother's chest between pushes. The matching pulse offers both comfort and courage. Mainstream codex fragments describe this as a final calibration. Historians still argue whether this practice was universal or reserved for challenging births. But here it seems instinctive. With the stone's ring guiding timing, reed fans pacing breaths, whispers, igniting resolve, and mirror reflections, sustaining focus, the mother pushes again. The midwife cries out softly, now, like dawn-breaking night, a final prompt invoking Tonatiuh's light. The contraction peaks, and you feel the chamber's energy shift. The baby's head emerges, followed swiftly by its shoulders. A collective breath, the mother's yours, the midwife's floats in the torch-lit air. The midwife reaches beneath the mother's body, cradling the newborn. The birthing stone, still warm and resonant, bears silent witness as midwife and mother share a tearful glance. The ritual has guided them through one of life's most intense passages. You step back, awed by the synergy of whisper stone and song. The baby's first cry fills the chamber, echoing against stone walls. In that moment, you understand the labor whisperer, a ritual of empathy and precision, weaving words and rhythm to guide birth's primal force. Move over modern midwifery classes. This is ancient science and art in perfect harmony. The first cries of new life still echo in the yurt's corners when the midwife turns her attention to healing afterbirth, the sacred practice of using the same birthing stone and its kin to staunch bleeding, restore vitality, and bind mother and child together in their first shared breaths. You steady yourself as she prepares for this final, vital ritual, one that proves a stone is not merely a tool for delivery, but a guardian in the fragile hours that follow. The midwife gently lifts the newborn into the mother's arms, placing skin-to-skin contact against her chest. The mother's breast rises and falls with the infant's eager cries. Meanwhile, the midwife unwraps the maguey poultice, a soft pad infused with maize silk, marigold petals, and pulverized jade dust. She places it lightly against the mother's abdomen, just above the birthing stone, which remains positioned to cradle her weight. Mainstream herbal manuals note maize silk's historical use to slow bleeding, and jade's symbolic link to life's resilience, while historians still debate whether jade dust added any medicinal value or served chiefly as a ritual reinforcement. In either case, you feel the poultice's cool relief spread across the mother's belly. Next, she retrieves a small obsidian lancet, sharp but polished to a mournful gleam. Obsidian blades prized for their surgical precision were common in Aztec medicine. Without hesitation, she makes a tiny, controlled nick at the mother's fingertip. A single bead of blood wells up. She presses the fingertip against the birthing stone's spiral glyph for a moment. The blood spreads into the carved lines, mixing with the stone's residual oils and resins. This blood blessing marks the stone anew, sealing its bond with mother and child through shared lifeblood. Mainstream codices describe this act as a symbolic offering, while some fringe researchers suggest it helped midwives gauge clotting. Historians debate whether this was an empirical or purely ritual practice, but witnessing it now, you sense its deep significance. She follows with the umbilical cord ritual, tying the cord's remaining stump to a carved notch on the stone's edge using maguey fiber. The knot is precise, 3 loops forward, 2 back, mirroring the naming ritual's pattern. Mainstream ethnographies note this alignment of numbers throughout midwifery rites. Historians still argue whether the sequence held calendrical significance or simply served as a mnemonic device. Regardless, the cord's stump rests against the stone's cool surface, drawing any lingering heat away from the mother's body and signaling the cord's gradual drying. Now comes the rock poultice, a practice of placing heated water stones, those pale blue smooth pebbles, against the mother's lower back and thighs. The midwife warms them in the residual coals of the birth fire and wraps each in a clean cloth before placement. As each heated stone presses warmth into muscle, you see the mother's shoulders relax. Mainstream medical historians credit this with reducing post-operative cramps, while fringe accounts claim the stones pushed residual amniotic fluid outward, aiding in uterine contraction. Whether the effect is physiological or psychological, the relief is tangible. Between applications, the midwife sings a low postpartum chant, Atl, Mix Quatl, Chalchiukozcatl. Let the waters weave healing threads back to flesh. Her voice rhythmic and soothing, anchors the mother's focus. Mainstream scholars compare this to modern lullaby effects in reducing pain, but historians still debate whether the chants Nahuatl metaphors held specific healing power or simply offered comfort. Yet, as you listen, you feel the chant's cadence syncing with the mother's slowing heartbeat. Next, the midwife prepares the herbal infusion, a tea of pine needles, rosemary, and marigold, known as the mama's breath. She pours it into a gourd cup and offers it to the mother. The mother sips the herbal warmth spreading through her. Mainstream botanical texts highlight these herbs' antiseptic and anti-inflammatory qualities. Historians note their presence in postpartum recipes across Mesoamerica, debating whether their use was widespread or reserved for elite births. Here, the infusion's effectiveness is clear. The mother's pallor brightens color, returning to her cheeks. Meanwhile, the midwife opens a small obsidian mirror and holds it before the mother's gaze. She murmurs gently, "See your strength," reflecting the mother's face, tired but radiant. This mirror affirmation draws on the belief that visual acknowledgement of survival fosters psychological resilience. Mainstream pregnancy studies confirm such affirmations can reduce postpartum blues. Historians still discuss whether Aztec midwives intentionally used mirrors for emotional support, or if this was a later adaptation. In this moment, the mother's grateful smile suggests its truth. Returning to the stone, the midwife sprinkles copal resin powder, finely crushed, over the stone's spiral, and fire glyphs brushing it into the resin grooves created during naming. The fragrant powder settles like golden dust. This resin seal renews the stone's sacred contract, reminding all who see it that its duty continues beyond birth. Mainstream ritual guides record copal's purifying role. Historians debate whether the practice extended stone longevity or simply marked ritual transition. Either way, the copal's scent lingers, binding the space in its warm embrace. For the final act, the midwife hands the mother a small clay whistle shaped like a heartbeat. She instructs her to blow on it softly whenever pain grips her, believing its sound calls forth the stone's protective echo. Experimental archaeology has shown similar whistles produce resonant frequencies of around 450 hertz, comforting to the human ear, but historians still argue if this frequency knowledge was intuitive or learned. As the mother softly blows, a clear trill emerges, and you glimpse the midwife's approving nod. With the rituals complete, the midwife gathers the stones birthing slab water, stones, poultice stones, and places them in a woven reed basket lined with maize husks. She buries the basket near the hearth, symbolically returning the stones to the hearth cycle. Mainstream folk traditions note this burial as preventing misuse and protecting the stone's residual power. Historians debate whether baskets were later retrieved for reuse or allowed to remain underground. In this silent burial, you recognize the cycle's end and beginning stones, resting until called upon again. As the mother cradles her child, swaddled in maize-dyed cloth, the midwife whispers, "Rest now, sister, for life renews." The chamber's energy softens the night's intensity, easing into gentle peace. You step back into the cool dawn air, the hush of early morning wrapping you in its embrace. Tonight, you've witnessed healing after birth, a ritual blending stone song herb and human touch to guide mother and child through life's most precarious moments. The stones have carried weight and warmth. The chants have woven comfort. The herbs have soothed body and spirit. In this holistic dance of healing, you see that Aztec midwives were architects of birth's entire continuum, from first contraction to final recovery, ensuring each life began within the safest embrace imaginable. You rise before the sun's first light to witness the final stage of the birthing stone's journey, stone as heirloom. The chamber is quiet, a few embers glowing where torches once burned. The mother, now rested with her newborn at her breast, sits cross-legged beside a low clay table draped in maize-dyed cloth. On it rests the birthing stone, still warm, its glyphs faintly shimmering in dawn's pale glow. Tonight you learn how this stone, so vital in labor and healing, becomes a family's most treasured heirloom. The midwife kneels and gently unwraps the cloth, exposing the stone's spiral and fire glyphs one last time. "This stone has served," she says softly, "and now it returns to memory." Mainstream ethno-historical accounts note that in Aztec culture, birthing stones were rarely discarded. Instead, they were preserved as tangible links between mothers and daughters. Historians still debate whether stones were kept in household shrines or passed privately within the family, but every source agrees on their enduring importance. First comes the purification recap. The midwife dips 2 handfuls of fresh water, drawn from the lunar basin earlier, and sprinkles it over the stone's surface. She murmurs, "Atl tlen pilt sintli," remember, the cradle of life, invoking the goddess of water's memory. Fringe scholars suggest this second cleanse literally washes away any residual labor spirits, ensuring the stone's neutrality for future use. Mainstream sources view it as a symbolic reset, a way to honor the stone's service without over-ritualizing its retirement. As droplets bead and roll off, the midwife retrieves a bundle of red, ochre-dyed quetzal feathers, each tied with gold thread. She fans the stone gently, the plumage's vibrant green and red, creating a living aura around the glyphs. These feathers mark its flight through one generation, she explains. Mainstream codices reference feathers in regalia to denote sacred transition, while historians still argue whether specific dyes signified the number of births the stone had witnessed. Regardless, you sense a fascinating blend of natural beauty, and coded meaning. Next is the story. Binding, the midwife takes a slender strip of deer leather, soft from years of handling, and using a stylus carved with maize motifs, inscribes a brief record in glyphic shorthand, the mother's name, the birth date, and a symbol for each surviving child. Here lie the echoes of their first breaths, she says, her tone reverent. Scholars note that such leather tags are rarely preserved archaeologically, but colonial-era inventories mention memory strips stored alongside household idols. Historians still debate how common this practice was among non-elite families, but its mention in both palace and peasant records suggests broad usage. A quirky household custom emerges as she ties the inscribed leather strip to the quetzal feather bundle with a maguey fiber cord knotted 6 times 1 knot for each year until the child's weaning. Some elders whisper that each knot trapped a blessing for that year's milestone, much as the midwife once tied the umbilical cord to the stone. Mainstream ethnographers describe this as a mnemonic device. Fringe commentators speculate it formed a protective lattice of ritual power over the growing child. You trace the cord's loops, feeling their subtle tensions, and imagine each as a promise woven in fiber. Now comes the gift of lineage. The midwife calls forward the mother's eldest daughter, already apprenticed in Temalacatl lore, and sets the stone in her small hands. The girl's eyes widen as she cradles its weight. The midwife intones, "You carry the family's strength. Let the stone spiral guide you in all that you do." Mainstream accounts note that daughters often inherited birthing stones as part of their formal training in midwifery. Historians still argue over whether sons ever received a counterpart ritual, but gendered patterns point strongly toward matrilineal passage. You watch the girl nod her fingers, tracing the glyphs as though greeting a long-lost relative. At this moment, the grandmother steps forward, her face lined by decades of memory. She lays her weathered hands over the stone and whispers a blessing in the old-tongue words scholars claim predate Nahuatl's imperial standardization. To the mothers yet to come, she murmurs. Historians still debate whether such ancestral prayers survived colonial suppression or were later reconstructed. But here, the grandmother's voice trembles with authenticity. You feel the weight of time with its conquests, losses, and whispered transmissions press gently upon the chamber. The midwife then wraps the stone in a fine cotton cloth, inscribed with family glyphs and maize-patterned borders. She seals the bundle with a drop of rose oil, noting that its scent will evoke memories of this rite for generations. Mainstream ritual manuals reference scented cloth wrappings in cosmic gifts. Historians still question whether rose oil was locally produced or imported via trade routes, but its fragrance undeniably links sense and memory. Finally, the mother offers the girl a small obsidian pendant carved in the mirror image of the stone's spiral glyph. "Wear this," she says, placing it at her daughter's throat, "so that when you labor, you remember the stone's guiding song." Mainstream studies identify obsidian pendants in burials and shrine deposits. Historians still puzzle over whether these served as midwives' badges or broader protective talismans. Here you see its intimate meaning, a vow of continuity. As dawn light spills into the hut, the girl bows to her mother and grandmother, then steps back, stone and pendant cradled against her heart. The midwife mother and grandmother join hands, forming a living ring around her. In this circle, you witness the birthing stone's transformation from tool to treasure, from a partner in labor to a conveyor of heritage. You exhale, feeling the gravity of this moment. The stone once pressed beneath the mother's body to guide life into the world now rests in waiting, ready to guide another generation. It carries within it stories of pain and joy, chants woven in smoke, echoes measured in mallet taps, and the warmth of countless hands. Stepping into the courtyard's fresh air, you realize that in Aztec midwifery, a birthing stone was never merely a stone. It was a living heirloom, a vessel of ancestral wisdom, maternal strength, and the promise of new life to come. A hush settles over the chamber as dawn's first light fights through torn reed walls, illuminating the birthing stone's spiral glyph in faint gold hues. Yet this peaceful scene masks a darker chapter in the stone's story: colonial suppression. When Spanish conquerors and their clerics thundered into the Valley of Mexico, determined to extinguish indigenous midwifery and its sacred rituals. Tonight you witness how birthing stones, once central to Temalacatl wisdom, were outlawed, hidden, and ultimately preserved by the fierce resilience of Aztec midwives. It begins with edicts and prohibitions. In 1529, the newly installed Archbishop of Mexico City, Fray Juan de Zumárraga, issued strict orders. All pagan rites must cease. He declared especially those concerning birth, where mothers are bewitched by stones and incantations rather than saved by holy sacraments. Mainstream colonial records confirm baptisms were mandated for mothers and newborns within hours of birth. Unchristianized midwives faced fines, imprisonment, or exile. Historians still debate how rigorously these edicts were enforced in rural communities versus the capital, but their chilling effect rippled through every Temalacatl. You stand in a dimly lit room where decades later an aged midwife named Citlali, one of the last officially trained Temalacatl, whispers of those grim days. She gestures to a worn leather pouch under her robe containing a fragment of a red-dyed quetzal feather and a tiny obsidian chip engraved with a spiral. "They seized our stones," she says, voice low. "We buried them in fields, in pond mud, in family shrines. We could not give up our daughter's birthrights." A fringe account in a 17th century Mestizo Chronicle recounts how midwives hid their birthing stones wrapped in maize husks beneath temple foundations that were raised. Archaeologists still search for such buried caches. The midwife's story turns to the secret apprenticeships that emerged. With Spanish schools forbidding native teachings, Temalacatl masters met their trainees by moonlight in hidden canyons and cave shrines. We lit only a single copal ember, Titlali recalls, and passed down prayers in whispered fragments. Mainstream anthropological studies note that aspects of midwifery survived through oral transmission in Nahuatl, even as Spanish priests condemned it. Historians still debate whether these clandestine schools used formal syllabi or improvised lesson by lesson, but evidence shows midwives preserved at least some naming chants, herbal recipes, and stone lore. You follow Citlali deep into her garden, where she shows you a small pond shaded by passion flower vines. Here, she says, drawing a long, careful breath, we once buried the stones. She wades into knee-deep water and retrieves 3 blue water stones, their pale surfaces mottled with algae and mineral stains. Time cleansed them, she murmurs, the bloodstones we hid under robin's egg nests, the earth stones beneath cactus roots. Mainstream ethnohistory verifies that many midwives maintained water caches, believing that ponds guarded rites from soldiers and friars. Historians still argue whether rural midwives formed networks to rotate these caches, or each household bore primary responsibility, but the survival of water stones like these speaks of systematic effort. You hold a water stone in your palm, surprised by its cool weight and subtle luster. Citlali continues, when the baby arrives, we baptize with the same water, but we whisper in Nahuatl too. This bilingual baptism became a hallmark of syncretic practice. Midwives drew holy water from church fonts, yet laid the stones beneath the mother's sheets, maintaining ancestral energy. Fringe researchers cite 18th century Franciscan letters lamenting that the women mix prayers for Tlazolteotl with Hail Marys, suggesting the Church's own records reveal indigenous formulas endured within Christian sacraments. The next rite you witness is the hidden naming ceremony performed in a mud-walled courtyard under cover of darkness. Citlali teaches her grandniece to carve a tiny spiral glyph on a clay tablet, an echo of the birthing stone's spiral, but small enough to conceal in a child's rattle. She whispers, "This tablet holds the name Matlactli," without invoking the stone overtly. Mainstream studies of colonial-era codices show such tablets accompanied children's christening gifts, bearing hybrid glyphs, half Nahuatl, half Spanish flourishes. Historians still puzzle over whether these tablets were widespread or limited to families with Temalacatl connections, but the practice's creativity underscores midwives' determination. You see a burial basket covered by reed mats in a corner, a storage spot for stones too sacred to display. Citlali shows how she layers maize husks, dried marigold petals, and a cross of copal resin on top, a ritual veil combining indigenous and Christian elements. She prays a hybrid invocation, Sancta Maria Guia a nuestras aguas, Chalchutlique, bendice nuestros corazones. This syncretic prayer marries Catholic and Aztec deities, reflecting the midwives' ingenuity in preserving rites under colonial scrutiny. Mainstream scholars note that many remote communities adopted such bilingual liturgies. Historians still debate the extent to which these prayers were tolerated by local clergy, but evidence suggests enforcement waned in the face of widespread indigenous conformity. As the Caribbean sun rises, Citlali moves to her heirloom stones, placing each on a low wooden shelf in her hearthroom. She caresses a white purity stone, its edges smoothed by centuries of water immersion. She recalls using it for postpartum purification, then baptizing the newborn over it weeks after birth. This dual usage illustrates how stones retained layered roles, surviving both pagan rites and Christian ceremonies. Fringe archaeological digs around Lake Texcoco have uncovered similar stones in church ruins, proof that stones buried in temple foundations resurfaced within friary walls, repurposed unknowingly. Mainstream archaeologists debate these finds' interpretation, but local lore supports a tradition of hidden retrieval. Citlali's final lesson involves the transmission of stone lore. She arches an eyebrow as she draws 3 generations to her side: daughters, nieces, grandnieces, and shares a final chant, Amoxtli tletl, Tonatiu tlachinoli tletl, Nochtli bookfire, sun pomegranate, fire night. She explains its mnemonic power, combining Nahuatl words for text, sun, and pomegranate to encode the stone's elemental categories. Mainstream linguistic studies recognize such poetic devices in Aztec oral culture. Historians still examine whether these specific intent mnemonics were regionally confined or pan-Mesoamerican, but their survival here testifies to the midwives' devotion. As you prepare to depart, Citlali retrieves a small obsidian pendant carved in the scroll pattern of the colonial era and presses it into your palm. "Carry this," she says, "so the stone's memory travels beyond our walls." You feel the pendant's cool edge and realize it embodies centuries of hidden service, devotion, and resilience. In its inky depths, you glimpse a spiral echoing through time. Walking back into dawn's light, you grasp the profound truth of colonial suppression and resilience, that birthing stones, though outlawed, buried, forbidden, lived on through ingenuity, syncretism, and the unwavering courage of Teotzcalli. Their legacy endures not in grand texts, but in whispered rites, hidden caches, and the steady hands of midwives who refused to let life's ancient wonders fade into silence. Centuries have passed since those first torches flickered in hidden cave shrines, Yet the spirit of the birthing stone endures in modern folkloric practices across Mexico's highlands and lowlands. You follow a narrow mountain path at pre-dawn, guided by the aroma of copal and marigold woven into the morning mist. Here, in villages that still speak Nahuatl dialects, midwives carry forward fragments of ancient rites, echoes of stone wisdom that defied colonial erasure. You arrive at a simple adobe hut where Doña Marta, a septuagenarian partera, traditional midwife, prepares for a birth. At the center of her hearth sits not a carved spiral glyph, but a smooth river rock she calls Piedra de Vida, stone of life. Mainstream ethnographic studies note that many contemporary parteras use local stones, river rocks, volcanic pebbles, even polished quartz, believed to inherit the power of their ancestors' birthing stones. Historians still debate whether this practice represents an unbroken lineage or a revival movement sparked by 20th century indigenismo. Yet, the stone's physical presence attests to resilience. Doña Marta picks up her Piedra de Vida and holds it to her palm, murmuring a lullaby-like chant. In her regional Nahuatl variant, Nakazka, Intoya Naka. Be born in peace, peace be your birth. She presses the stone gently against a mother's lower back, echoing the heating ritual of the water stones centuries earlier. Fringe observers suggest this contemporary heating stones warmed on a comal stovetop echoes ancestral knowledge of muscle relaxation, while mainstream health workers credit it as folk heat therapy. Next, Doña Marta places 2 leg support stones, flat pieces of polished obsidian, beneath the expectant mother's calves. She learned this from her grandmother, who insisted that elevating the legs eased labor by opening the pelvis, a practice corroborated by obstetric studies showing improved fetal descent in supported squatting positions. Historians still argue whether this technique survived through covert teaching or re-emerged through trial and error within peasant midwifery networks, but its efficacy bridges past and present. As contractions intensify, Doña Marta taps the Piedra de Vida with a wooden pestle, listening for its ring. It's not the crystalline echo of temple mallets, but a clear tone, nonetheless. She interprets its resonance as a sign to guide breathing, inhaling softly on a lingering ring, exhaling in the silence that follows. Modern midwives use similar auditory cues, counting in rhythmic patterns, but few connect it explicitly to stone resonance. Scholars still debate whether this continuity is intentional homage or intuitive adaptation, yet, in the hush of labor, you sense its comforting logic. After the baby emerges, Doña Marta smears the birthing stone with copal-infused oil, replicating the anointments enacted by Aztec Temalacatl. She learned the recipe from a 19th century healer's notebook, translated from Spanish annotations of Nahuatl chants. Mainstream historians Note that such recipe books, known as librettas, preserved herbal formulas and ritual instructions. Others argue these are syncretic compilations influenced by Catholic sacramentals. Regardless, the copal oil's scent, sweet, smoky, wraps the newborn in a familiar aroma of continuity. The ceremony culminates in a blessing circle where the stone is passed among female relatives, mothers, sisters, daughters, each pressing a palm against its surface and whispering prayers. Some invoke Santa Maria de Guadalupe, blending Catholic devotion with whispers to Chalchiutlichue, an example of deep syncretism. Fringe anthropologists highlight this as evidence of cultural creolization, while mainstream scholars see it as a pragmatic blending, enabling indigenous rites to persist under religious scrutiny. Either way, the stone becomes a vessel of collective hope, uniting families across faith lines. In nearby markets, you find hand-carved miniatures of birthing stones sold as talismans, small obsidian or river rocks, wrapped in colored cord and labeled Protección Maternal. These are marketed to tourists and local mothers alike, often with little knowledge of their ancient significance. Yet, midwives report that mothers clutching these talismans during contractions experience calmer labor. Whether through placebo effect or genuine folk healing, it recalls the Aztec belief that stones embody protective spirits. Furthermore, community workshops in Oaxaca and Puebla now teach parteras to recreate birthing stone rituals using modern materials, ceramic discs, tempered glass, even 3D printed spirals, promoting safe birth practices alongside cultural reclamation. Health NGOs sometimes sponsor these workshops, integrating ergonomic positioning techniques derived from ancestral lore. Historians still debate whether such institutional endorsements dilute the rite's authenticity or reinforce cultural pride. Many midwives argue that any method improving maternal outcomes honors their forebears' ingenuity. At the heart of these practices lies a scholarly debate. Did the tradition of birthing stones survive, intact, pass through hidden lineages, or was it revived, reconstructed from fragmentary memory and colonial records? Doña Marta tells you simply that we remember what our hands can feel, an assertion that tactile tradition transcends written history. Scholars increasingly recognize oral and embodied knowledge as valid sources, challenging earlier biases that dismissed non-literate cultures as lacking scientific rigor. As you leave Doña Marta's hut, the piedra de vida tucked safely in her satchel, you realize that the birthing stone's enduring legacy rests not in perfect ritual replication, but in mother-to-mother transmission of care. Whether hidden beneath pond waters, reshaped in syncretic rites, or remade with modern materials, the stone's essence, a tangible focal point for maternal strength, continues to guide births across centuries. You step into the sunlit path, aware that wherever women gather to birth, stones, river, obsidian, glass, or ceramic may yet be pressed close to bodies and hearts connecting each labor to an ancient continuum. In their hands, birthing stones live on as silent guardians of life. Dawn's light filters through thin reed panels, painting the yurt's interior in mottled gold and shadow. The mother and newborn sleep peacefully in one corner, while the midwife and her apprentice sit beside a low reed shelf heaped with stones of every shape and hue. Today the stones awaken once more for the rite of stone, as heirloom, transforming each from a tool of birth into a living relic of family memory and communal identity. The midwife selects the birthing stone first, the slate-gray oval named Temalacatl Axquich Teletl, generations ago. She holds it aloft, letting its spiral glyph capture dawn's light. This stone bore life 3 times, she says softly, placing it before her. Mainstream midwifery accounts note that stones witnessing multiple births accrued added prestige. Historians still debate whether such reuse was widespread or reserved for close-knit kinship circles. But here, the stone's patina of oils and resins tells a story no words can speak. First comes the honorific wash. The midwife pours a few drops of fragrant oil, a modern adaptation, combining marigold extract and copal tincture over the stone, letting each bead trace the spiral's curve. She murmurs, in their regional Nahuatl dialect, memories of mothers, past flow in your grooves. Fringe folklore. Scholars suggest that aromatic oils help preserve the stone's surface and repel moisture. Mainstream conservationists argue their value is chiefly symbolic, yet the scent of marigold and resin fills the yurt with ancestral warmth. Next is the inscription of lineage. Using a fine-point stylus carved from deer antler, the midwife traces each generation's birth date beside the spiral, adding a tiny dot for each child who survived infancy. The apprentice's hand hovers, then steadies as she inscribes the latest date in crisp indentations. Mainstream anthropological studies record that many family-kept stones bear mnemonic marks rather than full glyphs, a compromise between complex codices and vernacular memory. While historians still argue whether these marks ever matched formal calendrical notation or varied by local convention. Here, each dot connects mother to child in a deliberate chain of devotion. The midwife then ties the stone with a woven cord dyed in the daughter's family colors, deep indigo for paternal line, bright ochre for maternal. The cord's knots correspond to major life milestones, each knot for a wedding, a harvest festival, a rite of passage. You trace the cord's 5 loops, feeling their subtle tensions. Fringe genealogists highlight how knots encode family histories where paper records failed. Mainstream sociologists view them as part of oral tradition's mnemonic toolkit. Either way, the cord binds the stone not only to births, but to every chapter of family life. A curious ceremonial offering follows the Midwife sprinkles a handful of amaranth seeds, tiny, lustrous pearls, around the stone's base. She explains that amaranth, once a sacred Aztec grain, symbolizes immortality and resilience. Mainstream ethnobotanists note amaranth's nutritional importance in pre-Columbian diets. Historians still debate how its ritual uses endured after colonial bans, but here the seeds form a living wreath at the stone's feet, echoing rice-throwing customs at modern weddings, a testament to culinary and ceremonial syncretism. Now comes the blessing of passage. The midwife invites the mother's eldest daughter, now learning midwifery herself, to step forward. The young woman places her palm on the stone's glyph and whispers a vow. May your lines guide my hands when I cradle new life. This oath of apprenticeship mirrors the ancient naming ritual, marking the transfer of responsibility and reinforcing intergenerational continuity. Mainstream apprenticeship models in ethnographic records highlight the importance of embodied pledges. Historians still discuss whether formal rites marked every generational handover or only major lineage junctures. But the solemnity here feels unmistakable. As the morning sun warms the yurt's walls, the midwife drapes the stone in a new cloth cover, hand-woven from local cotton and embroidered with maize stalks and star motifs. She seals the cloth with a single drop of rose marigold oil, ensuring the cover's threads carry both scent and promise. Fringe textile researchers point to surviving 19th century garments bearing similar embroidery. Mainstream costume historians note that domestic weaving often encoded symbolic patterns passed down through matrilineal lines. The embroidered maize and stars thus echo dual themes: life's sustenance and cosmic guidance. Finally, the midwife places the heirloom stone on a low household altar, surrounded by a small clay bowl of holy water and a bundle of copal incense. She lights the incense and chants a brief prayer that merges Catholic and Nahuatl invocations. Santa Maria, Ichalchutlicue, protect our bloodlines. From earth's embrace to sky's dome, may the stone watch over all. This syncretic blessing reflects centuries of lived faith, where midwives wove together church and temple prayers to sustain beloved traditions under shifting religious landscapes. Mainstream religious studies acknowledge such blending as a form of cultural resilience. Historians still assess its impact on indigenous identity, but few deny the profound conviction that underlies each prayer. As the incense smoke spirals upward, the mother and apprentice bow together, hands pressed to their hearts. The heirloom stone, newly adorned and inscribed, radiates quiet authority in its place of honor. You step back into the courtyard's fresh air, carrying with you the weight of memory and the promise of enduring care. Tonight, you've witnessed how birthing stones, once instruments of life's threshold, transform into vessels of lineage, memory, and hope binding generations in a continuous circle of care that not even time or conquest can sever. The mountain wind whistles gently through the reed mats as you arrive at a community gathering in the village plaza, a space where tradition and innovation meet under an open sky. Here unfolds the final chapter, the enduring legacy of birthing stones as their echo ripples through modern midwifery, public health initiatives, and cultural revival movements. Tonight, you'll see how an ancient practice, stone-guided birth, continues to shape lives and beliefs in a rapidly changing world. The event begins with a demonstration yurt set up in the plaza's center, lanterns hung on surrounding trees like soft constellations. Inside, a group of young parteras, traditional midwives from diverse backgrounds, some indigenous, some mestiza, gather around a polished slate slab engraved with a spiral motif reminiscent of ancient glyphs. This contemporary birthing slab was designed by a collaboration between local artisans and a university ethnography department, blending traditional forms with modern ergonomics. Mainstream NGO reports praise such partnerships as models of culturally respectful maternal care. Historians still debate the balance of authenticity versus adaptation, but the result is a powerful symbol of continuity. One midwife trained in both ancestral lore and certified nursing steps forward to explain the slab's features: adjustable height legs, washable surfaces treated with antimicrobial plant extracts, engraved drainage channels for sanitized fluid flow, and side grips echoing Obsidian handle placement. She demonstrates its use in a squat simulation, encouraging participants to try the position themselves, the crowd ranging from curious elders to expectant mothers tumbles laughter and nods as they test the slab's stability. Fringe tech anthropologists marvel at the seamless fusion of pre-industrial wisdom and modern safety standards. Mainstream healthcare providers commend its respect for women's natural birthing instincts. Nearby, a group of students from the local health sciences university distribute 3D printed spiral tokens passed out like talismans. Each token comes with a QR code linking to an online archive of oral histories, midwifery chants, and herbal recipes recorded in Nahuatl, Spanish, and English. This digital preservation initiative was spearheaded by a joint grant from UNESCO and a regional cultural institute. Historians still scrutinize the ethics of digitizing sacred knowledge. Some worry about cultural appropriation, yet the midwives here embrace the tokens as tools for younger generations to reconnect with their heritage wherever they live. As dusk deepens, the gathering shifts to a storytelling circle around a fire pit. Elders share tales of hidden birthing stones, those buried under temple ruins, fished from sacred springs, or whispered of in colonial chronicles. One storyteller recounts how her grandmother retrieved a stone from beneath an old chapel foundation and used it in secret home births during oppressive regimes. Another recalls a stone discovered in an abandoned Spanish hacienda, its glyph worn but still resonant, and how it was reclaimed by indigenous midwives to guide a high-risk delivery. Mainstream oral history projects value these personal narratives as windows into lived resilience. Historians study their convergences to map the stone's hidden journeys through time. Between stories, the community births a living quilt of squares bearing embroidered spirals, each square contributed by a different family. Children pin their pieces to the quilt, symbolizing future generations. Fringe folklore scholars recognize quilt making as a modern analog to codex painting, transforming collective memory into tactile art, while mainstream cultural preservation argues it fosters intergenerational dialogue. You watch as the quilt grows an evolving tapestry of stone-inspired motifs, botanical dyes, and hand-stitched glyphs. Finally, the gathering concludes with a blessing ceremony led by the village's spiritual leader, a midwife and lay Catholic catechist who sprinkles copal smoke and holy water over the quilt, the 3D printed tokens, and a single river stone set atop a ceremonial table. She prays in Nahuatl and Spanish hear our ancestors' whispers in stone and circuit. May each birth honor the wisdom of spirals and sparks. This syncretic benediction embodies the enduring legacy, the birthing stone's journey from temple to yurt to digital archive, from secret caches to community quilts, from tactile glyphs to voice recordings online. Here, ancient ritual and modern innovation converge, demonstrating that true legacy evolves, adapts, and thrives when rooted in respect. As you depart under a sky awash with stars, you carry with you the profound realization that birthing stones are more than relics of the past. They are living catalysts guiding births, fostering community, and weaving continuity between ancestors and descendants. Their echoes endure in every heartbeat, every whispered chant, every collaborative design. They remind us that when we honor tradition with creativity and care, we craft legacies that truly stand the test of time. The sun has fully set now, and only the soft glow of firelight remains flickering on reed walls and the community quilt, heavy with spirals. You've journeyed from ancient temple chambers to modern plazas, tracing the birthing stone's path across centuries of ritual resilience and reinvention. Let your mind drift gently now as each echo of stone and chant settles like warm ash on your thoughts. Imagine the spiral glyph, carved and painted, resting finally in the hearth's quiet corner, its grooves holding every mother's breath, every midwife's vow. Picture those stones hidden beneath moss and water, then reborn in clay-engraved tokens and 3D printed keepsakes carried in pockets and passed in quilts. Feel their weight transformed, once cradled under hips in labor's fierce hour, now nestled softly in waiting hands, symbols of strength, heritage, and hope. Exhale, softly. Let the cadence of ancestral chants, Atl, Mixcoatl, Talacanoli, lull your thoughts. Each whispered syllable threads together earth and sky, body and spirit, weaving a canopy of calm around you. The quilt stitches, the digital archive's code, may differ in medium, but both carry the same promise that life's thresholds deserve respect, care, and creativity. Now sense the collective breath of mothers and midwives whose courage refused to yield through conquest, suppression, and change. Their hands shaped stones and stories alike, ensuring each generation's first breath was honored. In their timeless craft, you find a lesson that care, wisdom, and shared purpose can forge connections far stronger than any artifact. So drift now into dreams, cradled by the spiral's embrace. Imagine the birthing stone's gentle hum resonating beneath you, a lullaby older than memory. Sleep deep, knowing the circle of life spins on rooted in ancient rock, carried by human hearts and forever guided by the enduring echo of mother to mother love.